I started writing the poems in this collection when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in August 2020. I spent the next 9 months going through active treatment, and as I began with chemotherapy, I was posting pieces online and just kind of updating people on how I was doing in the course of the pandemic. And at a certain point, my husband suggested, you should put a poem up there, and I resisted. I was writing poems just for me because I needed to process the experience. But I was pretty much too tired to argue, so I posted it, and it surprised me how people responded, that they said that they'd been through something similar but didn't have the words to describe it, or perhaps a family member had gone through cancer and wasn't able to tell them how they felt. And so the poems gave them an opportunity to understand somebody they loved a little bit better. And because of that, I think in part, I kept writing. And I had just finished chemotherapy, and it was actually, I was waking up from my surgery, from my mastectomy, and my husband gave me a call and said, he said, I love you, your nodes were positive for cancer, and you have won the Chad Walsh Chapbook Prize. He knew which order to go in. Bad news first, good news second. And at that point, I had written poems about chemo. I'd written poems a little bit anticipating the surgery. But the chapbook came out in April 2021, which was just when I was finishing radiation. Almost on the exact day I finished radiation, I had the chapbook on my hands, which was kind of an amazing feeling. And at that point, I'd been continuing to write through surgery, through radiation, and I was almost at the point where I had a full book together. One of the challenges of moving out of a chapbook, where you can really focus very specifically on one thing, was that I knew I needed to braid in more timelines. And just love poetry wasn't quite cutting it, and the cancer poetry, it just wasn't quite cutting it. And so I started to incorporate more of what I was seeing happening in America politically at that point. Movements such as Black Lives Matter, moments such as the insurrection at the Capitol. And that provided what I needed, that third element to balance everything out and create the book itself. Historically, previously, I'd really written in a very dense, lyrical language. This poetry is much more straightforward. It is much more direct, and it's actually a lot more like the way I speak. It has more humor in it. It has more liveliness, I think. And in a lot of ways, that was because I didn't edit as much. I didn't feel like I had as much time. I was concerned, as my doctors were, that I wasn't going to survive the cancer and or its treatment. And I was writing quickly to keep up with it. To be on the shortlist for the T.S. Eliot Prize is an incredible honor. To have my name associated in the same breath with T.S. Eliot and with the other luminous poets is just an incredible feeling. The poems in the book really are trying very hard to be as direct as possible when I talk about the experience of having cancer. And for me, this is really essential because I wanted for people who had the experience to recognize what I was talking about. I also wanted a lot of clarity for people who had not had the experience. One of the things that makes cancer so frightening, I think, is the fact that there's a lot of mystery around it. And people, when they are going through the experience, understandably, tend to withdraw. So this was my attempt to come out and make things as open as I possibly could. On the other hand, of course, I'm also writing love poems. And one of the things that I found was so pleasurable about experimenting with a new style of being more direct with my poetry was that I could also apply that to the people that I loved. I found it much more easy to come out and say things than I had ever before. There was so much left, so much less to lose, really, by being frank and open about experiences, and to appreciate the humor of a long-term marriage. And there's a lot to laugh about, both in cancer, strangely enough, but certainly in marriage.